Hello, you beautiful people. Thanks for tuning in for Dirty Teeth. I had the pleasure talking to Alan about all my secrets, or not so secrets any longer, of how I went fast on last year's Tour de Divide. Have fun watching it. I hope you're gonna learn something, or at least it's gonna inspire you to do some crazy stupid shit.
You heard it from the man himself. This video is going to focus on Justinas Leveika and everything he did and all the stuff that came together for him to beat Mike Hall's long-standing, fastest known time on the Tour Divide. Justinas has stated that he races by heart and not by numbers, but lucky for us, he does track all his ride stats and he did use a power meter during the race, so today we're going to geek out on everything. And if you think you've got the chops to challenge his insanely fast Tour Divide record of 13 days, 2 hours, and 16 minutes, which, by the way, he achieved during the Grand Depart without any controversy, hallelujah, then get comfy and grab a notepad. Or even if you're just in awe of the achievement like I am, there's still a bunch of great info and takeaway because we're going to dig into his training, fueling, hydration, calories burned, his power output, sleep and recovery, gear and bike choices, psychology and tactics, and all the subtle nuances that often get taken for granted. On paper, Justinas' cycling metrics are pretty impressive, although I'm certain that many people he's raced against, and probably some of you at home on your couches, have higher power numbers and VO2 max and all that. He's the perfect example that bike pack racing is so much more than your FTP and watt kg. But it does offer some insight, and I'm sure many of you are curious, so we'll start with some basic data. As I post this video, Justinas is 36 years old. His birthday is on April 5th, 1989, which puts him at 35 years of age during the 2024 Tour Divide. It also means he's got plenty of strong bike pack racing years ahead of him, and we definitely have not seen the best or last of him yet. He is 184 centimeters or 6 feet tall, and he weighs around 74 kilograms or 163 pounds. His maximum heart rate is 204, and his functional threshold power, or FTP, is around 300. So at a weight of 74 kilograms, that gives Justinas a watt kg or power to weight ratio of 4.05. He hasn't tested his VO2 max in many years, but we did dig up an old Instagram post from 2017 when he was first getting into competitive cycling, and he had just received a VO2 max score of 68. But beyond the solid power numbers and VO2 max, what makes him tick and what else is going on that makes him so dang fast? I was super curious too, so I asked him. Justinas was born in and grew up in the Baltic state of Lithuania in northeastern Europe. And at the ripe old age of 25, he moved to Norway to finish up his studies, and he's lived there ever since. He now resides in a small mountain town called Tolga, where he also happens to put on a bikepacking race called Bright Midnight in July. It looks amazing and is perched high on my personal bucket list. By the way, there's a fantastic video out about the 2024 Bright Midnight race, and Justinas just started his own YouTube channel with a bunch of super fun content. I'll put links to both of those in the description. Boop. As a teenager, Justinas took a summer job in a chocolate factory where he worked night shifts. After finishing university, he began a career in the nursing field where he's become used to working long hours through the night. Have these experiences helped him ride his bike through the night during races? Maybe. For the last 6 years, Justinas had been running a long-term care facility, but with bike pack racing taking up more and more of his time, he stepped down from the stress and responsibility of his management role just before the Tour Divide in 2024. He's still working as a nurse, and his current position allows him to make his own schedule and take shifts when he's available. He does not have guaranteed hours, but he does have the flexibility to come and go as he pleases, so he can tackle all the bikepacking goals on his calendar. By the way, a bit of Tour Divide trivia for you. Justinas is not the first nurse to win the Tour Divide. Josh Cato also has a career in nursing, and he surprised pretty much everybody when he narrowly beat Jay Peterberry and Neil Belchenko for the victory back in 2015. Not only does Justinas' selflessness shine through in his career choice, but he's also a warm showers host, and he opens up his home to fellow wanderers. In fact, while I was chatting with him the other day, he had a couple from Germany staying with him that happened to be touring all over Norway on a tandem bike. Pretty cool. As a youth, Justinas was always into athletics. He played handball, he swam, and he played hours and hours of soccer with his buddies. By age 12, soccer was all he could think about, and he almost went to a special soccer academy, but wound up putting academics first. He still wound up playing soccer in college on the Lithuanian medical national team and in a semi-pro league. I'm pretty sure that playing soccer his whole life helped him build that massive aerobic engine that he has today. Since moving to Norway, Leveika has also become an avid cross-country skier, which helps keep him fit during the long winter season. And in the last couple years, he's gotten into fat biking more and more in the snowy months as well. Justinas started cycling later in life, and it really wasn't until he moved to Norway that he got into it seriously. When he was full-time at the long-term care facility, it had him working for a couple weeks on, and then he'd get a week off at a time, which he'd spend traveling around the country on his bike. In 2017, he started training seriously with the goal of joining a UCI mountain bike team. In 2019, he finally made the team and started competing in mountain bike stage races. That year, he placed 5th in the Lithuanian National Championship for cyclocross, XCO, and XC Marathon, and it became obvious to everyone around him that he was gifted on a bike. But then COVID happened, and unfortunately, the team folded. Justinas continued riding as a means of exploration, and he began making up routes and testing himself to see how far he could ride. And the next thing you know, a friend talked him into signing up for his first bikepacking event in 2021. This was the 1,000-kilometer Trans-Pyrenees race, and he wound up placing 4th amongst a sea of heavy hitters. Interestingly, Ulrich Bartolomos was first that year, and Sofian Sahili placed 2nd. Both would wind up winning the Tour Divide, Sofian in 2022 and Uba in 2023. The rest is history. Since his first race in 2021, Justinas has competed in well over 15 of the world's toughest multi-day races and many more single-day ultras. He's pretty much always on the podium, and some notable victories include the race around Rwanda, 3 Peaks, Dales Divide, 7 Serpents, Fat Viking, the Atlas Mountain Race, the Arizona Trail 800, the Colorado Trail Race with an asterisk that I won't get into, and of course the Tour Divide. Justinas first raced the Tour Divide in 2023, kind of on a whim and without much planning or prep. He still came in a strong 2nd place behind Ulrich, and Justinas made plenty of rookie mistakes and was plagued by some very costly mechanicals. Just after leaving Lima, Montana, his suspension fork locked up and stopped working. Then the SRAM Axis batteries on his derailleur wouldn't take a charge, so he had to ride single speed for a while when he got into Wyoming. And soon after that, his chain broke, so he rode like a kid's scoot bike, kicking and pushing along with his feet for 6 miles until he reached Flag Ranch. From there, he hitchhiked to a bike shop in Jackson to get what he needed, and by the time all was said and done, he'd lost about 7 hours on the front runners. Later in the race, he broke a rear spoke and was riding on a wobbly wheel as he entered New Mexico. His gears stopped working again in the mountains before Cuba, so he was back to single speed, kicking his derailleur up and down the cassette when he wanted to shift gears. Then, shortly after leaving Cuba, his right pedal came completely off the spindle. All this cost him some massive time, not to mention he infamously spent 13 hours holed up in a porta-john in the Great Basin with Uba and Jens. Still, with all those hurdles, Justinas made it to Antelope Wells in only 14 days, 16 hours, and 57 minutes, which was about 18 hours behind Mike Hall's record time of 13 days, 22 hours, and 51 minutes. Justinas figured that if he cleaned up his act and fixed some of those mistakes and got some decent weather, he might be able to shave 20 hours or so off his time, and that lingered in his mind heading into 2024. So, with the knowledge gained from 2023, what did Justinas focus on doing better heading into 2024? First and foremost was minimizing those mistakes and careless errors that cost him so much time in 2023. Justinas still doesn't care much for detailed planning, and he feels like it takes some of the adventure away and thus prefers to go with the flow and make decisions based on how he's feeling in the moment. But he did recognize that he needed to take a more serious approach if he wanted to go faster in 2024. And now that he'd in essence pre-ridden the course in 2023, he knew that having that route knowledge to lean on would help him make smarter choices. So he made a loose list of possible places he'd like to sleep and resupply. And he also examined his personal Strava files from 2023 to see where he could be more efficient. In addition, he chose to post less on social media, which he felt like he emphasized too much in 2023. He also didn't check track leaders until he got to Salida, Colorado, and rarely scoped it after that. Of course, dot watchers that came up to him en route gave him updates of other riders' positions, but he remained focused on his own pace and taking care of himself instead of getting caught up in the noise. To combat all the mechanicals from 2023, he made sure his bike was overhauled and serviced from top to bottom this time as well. He still chose Shimano XTR pedals, but this time he put some brand new ones on before the race. He also had a suspension serviced, wheels trued and tensioned, and he put fresh grease in all the bearings, installed a brand new bottom bracket, a fresh SRAM XXSL transmission drivetrain. You get the point. This time he made sure his bike was dialed and ready. And this time around, all that effort paid off because he had absolutely zero mechanicals. He made it through the whole race on the same chain and the same cassette and front chainring, and the only time he had to mess with his bike at all was to change his brake pads near Union Pass before heading towards Pinedale, Wyoming. His electronic shifting worked flawlessly, although he did carry 5-axis batteries this time because he was so paranoid, and his fork stayed plush and smooth for the whole race and was only locked out when it was by his choosing. Next, he prioritized long-term comfort on the bike, which led to many equipment changes from 2023. At the top of the list was swapping from the hardtail Trek Pro Caliber SL to a full suspension Trek Super Caliber Gen 2 for 2024. This gave him 80 millimeters of rear travel that undoubtedly helped reduce the accumulated fatigue and wear and tear on his body that paid dividends as the race wore on. Justinas was the first person to win the Tour Divide on a full squish bike, which he also used to win the Atlas Mountain Race earlier in the year. And as more and more people realize how much comfort equates to speed over the long haul, I have zero doubt that more folks than ever will be following suit and opting for the full sauce on the 2025 Tour Divide than ever before, mark my words. He also changed his drop bars out for a flat bar setup that put him in a more relaxed, upright position overall. He still used his tried and true Data Parabolica Dua Alta Aero bars, which were installed up on high riser spacer blocks. This is a definite must to take the pressure off his hands and arms whenever feasible, and he had SRAM blips installed at the tips of the aero bars as well, so he could shift gears from that position without interruption. In 2023, Justinas chose a RockShox Sid Ultimate Fork with 100 millimeters of travel, but in 2024 he went for a slightly more robust fork with a little more travel, and this came in the way of a Fox 34 Stepcast with 110 millimeters of squish. In 2023, Justinas was plagued with saddle sores, very common on the Divide. He was using an Infinite saddle, and this time around he opted for a Bontrager Aeolus RSL, and he had way less problems with his backside, even though his personal care routine was pretty much the same. Whether this was because of swapping to a full suspension bike or changing saddles or his butt getting tougher over time, it's hard to tell, but it's probably a combo of all three, and most importantly, his backside was in much better shape this go-round. He also opted for slightly wider tires this time around. He previously used 2.1-inch Vittoria Mescals, and he swapped to 2.2-inch Continental Race Kings, which are also considered to be just a little faster rolling as well. Justinas was worried about the durability of the Race Kings at first, but they are the same tire that Mike Hall used on his record-setting ride in 2016, so Justinas figured they'd be good enough for him. It's worth noting that Continental just discontinued the Race King, but they replaced them with an almost identical tire called the Dubnital, which I'm looking forward to testing and reviewing pretty soon. If you're curious about tire pressure, there was no specific PSI, front and rear, or any of that. Justinas simply pressed them with his thumb and set them by feel at the beginning of the race, and he never had to touch them again. A 36-tooth chainring was the call in 2023, but Justinas went with a slightly smaller 34-tooth chainring for 2024. He was concerned with losing a little top-end speed, but just before the Tour Divide, he entered the 224-mile Le Mans gravel race. During this event, he was riding his Super Caliber with the 34-tooth ring, and he was up against people on legit gravel bikes pushing much bigger gearing, and guess what? He still won and felt that he had plenty of top-end speed. This gave him the confidence to use it on the Divide, while also noting the 34 would help him be nicer to his knees and keep him from grinding at super low cadences more than necessary on the steeper climbs. After the fact, Justinas still believes that he had plenty of top-end speed and he would use the 34 tooth again. Other notable bits of his bike and gear setup were a Garmin 1040 solar head unit, a Quarg power meter, Hunt proven carbon prototype wheels, a Sun Dynamo hub with a Supernova M99 front light, Bontrager XXX handlebars and seat post, SRAM transmission, XX SL drivetrain with a 1052 cassette, and 172.5 crank arms. He used the Magura MT8 hydraulic disc brakes, and his luggage was carried via tailfin bags and a tailfin rear rack. This included a custom frame bag, a prototype of their rear rack pack, and a prototype of their long top tube bag. There are plenty of other videos with detailed bike checks that you can scope out, so I'll leave it at that. Keeping on the topic of added comfort, Justinas addressed blister issues he had on his feet in 2023 by switching from Bontrager cross-country shoes to a looser fitting trail shoe made by DMT called the DK10. He really liked them and he wound up using them on both the Colorado Trail and the Arizona Trail afterwards with no blister issues. He also brought a slightly more robust sleep kit than he took in 2023, or as Justinas describes it, somewhere between comfy and minimal. This included an inflatable pillow, but unfortunately he lost it on the second night of the race. Justinas also took an inflatable sleeping pad this time that he didn't take in 2023. The goal was obviously to improve the quality of sleep he got when he was bivvying outdoors. More on sleep in a moment. All of his main clothing items were supplied by Albion, and regardless of the snowy winter weather in Montana or the crippling heat of New Mexico, his gear never stopped him from charging forward. And his favorite pieces of kit were the Zoa rain jacket and pants. One thing that's kind of funny is that he switched from bib shorts and a jersey to a full-on aero suit after Brush Mountain Lodge. This means he was carrying that thing the whole way while he was waiting for the right moment to bust it out. Anyway, it was also one of his favorite pieces of kit, and 100% it's gotta be the secret weapon that kept him ahead of Uba. Just kidding. In case you didn't get it, that was sarcasm. Let's switch gears for a minute and touch on training. During the long winters in Norway, Justinas trains by doing intensity rides and intervals indoors on the turbo trainer, and then he goes out for longer volume rides and fun rides outside by fat biking on snow and doing some Nordic skiing to mix it up. He also blends in some strength training in the early season. Justinas loves riding his bike and he loves racing, but specifically tailored workouts and structured training plans aren't really his jam, so he pretty much races for his training. Believe it or not, the Tour Divide was actually his 7th ultra race of 2024. Leading up to it, he did the Fat Viking 150 on January 27th, the Atlas Mountain Race on February 10th, the Spider Human 1300 on March 28th, Desertus Bicus on April 13th, Race Across Italy on May 3rd, and the Le Mans Gravel Race on May 18th. Total those up, and he raced around 3,000 miles, with 212,890 feet of climbing in 261 hours of ride time over 23 weeks. Dude, that is ridiculous. He averaged 130 miles and 9,200 feet of climbing with 11.3 hours of ride time per week in the months leading up to the Tour Divide with just racing alone. He often jokes that he doesn't need a cycling coach because his ultra racing lifestyle is his coach. But in fact, Justinas did start working with a bikepacking specific coach named Peter McSherry leading up to the Tour Divide. Mostly, he needed help with recovery and to make sure he didn't overtrain and go too hard in the lead up. And although he can't stand the idea of a training plan, he consulted her for guidance and suggestions to get the most benefit out of his time on the bike, and she might have even been able to sneak in a little bit of structured workouts. For the time in between his crazy race schedule when he wasn't racing or tapering, he'd get between 15 and 25 hours per week, all the way up to 35 hours on his biggest weeks. And these would include back-to-back 10 to 12 hour rides. They'd also build in recovery weeks of just 8 hours or so on the bike so they could bake in the endurance adaptations and help keep him from getting overcooked. Would you believe that even after all that, Justinas told me he went into the 2023 Tour Divide in better shape and with higher power numbers than in 2024? Go figure. I've seen some inaccurate stats on the internet using track leaders with spot tracker data that only pings every 5 or 10 minutes. So I gathered data from his Garmin Edge 1040 head unit and his Korg power meter, which should give us a much better idea of what was really going on. And with that said, here are some fun stats to ponder. By the way, if you're wondering, Justinas did not wear a heart rate monitor on the TD. He's all about that power. His overall average power for the whole race was 143 watts, and his normalized power was 163. Anywho, it should come as no surprise that his highest average power and normalized power was achieved on day one when Justinas was at his freshest. On that day, he had a 189 watt average and a 206 watt normalized. For what it's worth, his max power hit 800 watts, and that was achieved on day 8. When it comes to spinning pedals, Justinas had an average overall cadence of 71.3 RPMs during the whole ride. Again, his highest average cadence was on day 1 when he was flying high at 82 RPMs. On day 2, it dropped to 77, and then by day 3 to the finish line, he bounced around between 68 to 70 or 71. His overall average moving speed was 11.4 miles per hour. On day 2, while traveling 252 miles from Fernie to Ferndale, he had his highest average moving speed of 12.9 miles an hour. His slowest average moving speed was during the 171 mile stretch between Platoro, Colorado and Cuba, New Mexico later on in the race. And even on this, his worst day, he still averaged 9.3 miles an hour. I should also mention that on that day, and again near Abiquiu and in the Gila Wilderness as he was heading towards Silver City, is also where he encountered the highest temperatures of the ride. It got up to 111 degrees Fahrenheit or 44 degrees Celsius, and it'll come as no surprise that being this late in the race and with that energy sapping heat, this is where he also had his lowest power numbers of the whole ride. On the second to last day, he averaged 117 watts with a normalized power of 146, and on his final day, Justinas' average power was 121 with an NP of 139. If you're wondering, the coldest day and lowest temperature he faced was 19 degrees Fahrenheit or -7 Celsius, and that was nearing Flag Ranch by the Tetons after crossing the border from Idaho into Wyoming. And his highest speed for the whole race was 48.5 miles an hour, which he hit on a pavement descent near Deer Lake in New Mexico. Whoosh! The total moving time on his bike came out to 9 days, 21 hours, and 50 minutes. If we subtract that from the total elapsed time of 13 days, 2 hours, and 16 minutes, we get a total stop time of 3 days, 4 hours, and 26 minutes. And if we crunch those numbers a little further, that means he was pedaling and or hiking and pushing his bike towards the finish line 77.5% of the time that he was out on the route, which also means he was off the bike either resting, sleeping, resupplying, bathing, sitting down for a meal, etc., 22.5% of the time. Per his Garmin files, the total climbing was 171,460 feet, which does seem a little low compared to most readings, which tend to come in closer to 200,000 feet. But even so, that still averages out to a conservative estimate of 13,200 feet of climbing per day. Also per his Garmin, the total distance covered came out to 2,709 miles, whereas the race is officially listed at around 2,750 miles. And if we average it out over the 13 days, he's covering roughly 206 to 207 miles per day on average. Interestingly, Justinas' shortest day mileage-wise on the bike was day 1, where he rode a mere 158 miles to Fernie. However, Justinas made his biggest push of the whole race right at the end when he made it all the way from Cuba to Antelope Wells, which is approximately 542 miles with 24,420 feet of climbing without a legitimate sleep break. He was intending to stop and sleep at a motel in Silver City, but he wound up riding through to beat out a storm that was chasing him down. So instead he relied on cat naps and short breaks here and there to get him through the insane 55-hour effort. On the topic of insane, he also went slightly delirious right at the end when he got to Achita, and he wound up standing at an imaginary bus stop with some imaginary woman as they were waiting for a bus to pick him up and take him to Antelope Wells. Luckily, he did snap out of it and realized he needed to get back on the bike and finish the race. But on the topic of sleep or lack thereof, he also had a massive 50-hour and 395-mile push from Ferndale to Elkhorn Hot Springs earlier in the race. And to get the recovery for those huge efforts and the demands for the race in general, Justinas did strategically opt to sleep inside at legit motels and cabins 7 times during the race. This oftentimes included a shower and an opportunity to charge electronics. And when he laid down for sleep, he did set an alarm on his phone for a whopping 3 hours before he was up and at 'em and getting on the move again. In case you're wondering, those legit sleep stops were as follows: Fernie at route mile 158, Elkhorn Hot Springs at mile 805, Flag Ranch at almost 1,100 miles, Brush Mountain Lodge at mile 1,500, Sargent's at mile 1835. This may be the wishy-washiest of all his indoor sleeps because it was a campground where he paid for a shower and then he slept on a bench in the warm bathroom for an hour or an hour and a half total, but he was still inside, so you can decide if it counts. Anyway, after that, he slept in Platoro at mile 2,000, and during his final push to the finish, Justinas did manage to catch a little shut-eye in Pie Town at the Toaster House around mile 2387, although it was more like an extended power nap than a legitimate sleep session. He is, after all, the king of cat naps, which we'll detail in a sec. But what about bivvying outside? Where else did he stop for sleep? Well, there were 4 spots that Justinas took time to set up a bivvy and crawl into his sleeping bag and get some real sleep. These were in Ferndale at mile 410, near the start of the Great Basin at mile 1275, heading into Silverthorne at mile 1676, and near Cuba at mile 2168. When he lied down to squeeze in some Z's at these bivvy spots, he'd set his alarm for just 1 hour. Yep, you heard me right. No rest for the wicked. But as I just said, Justinas is also the king of accumulating power naps, so in addition to these more legitimate bivvy sessions, his MO would often be to ride until he was too tired to travel efficiently, then he'd pull off to the side of the road or trail or pit toilet, lie down without setting up his sleep kit, and he'd set the alarm on his iPhone for 15 to 30 minutes. Then he'd get up and jump right back on his bike. Sometimes he'd get many hours of energy from these naps. Other times he'd only get a couple of hours of solid riding before he needed to lie back down for another quick snooze. If he was cold, he'd do the short 15-minute naps so he wouldn't start shivering or get too cold and have to deal with warming his body back up. If the weather was nicer, he'd usually set the alarm for a more generous 30 minutes. Luckily, he never slept through his alarm once on the whole trip. According to Justinas, his best quality sleep session was at the Brush Mountain Lodge, and his worst sleep was on a wet gravel road just before turning onto the pavement towards Silverthorne. He was pushing really hard to get to Silverthorne, and he really wanted to sleep in a bed that night, but he just couldn't go anymore and he had to pull over. Justinas has never had a sweat rate or a sweat salt concentration test, and he doesn't set any specific goals for fluid intake like liters per hour or any of that. As with pretty much everything else, he approaches hydration based on feel and listening to his body. He had a maximum water carrying capacity of just 3 liters for the majority of the race, and this was achieved with a single bladder that he carried on his back, tucked inside of a Solomon Sense Pro 10 hydration vest. By the way, he ripped his vest on a tree a couple days before the finish, and then he had to jimmy rig it back together, and he also had to backtrack for a bit once he realized that his passport had fallen out during the incident, but he did find it without too much trouble laying in the trail, so crisis averted. Anywho, the bladder was reserved for straight up drinking water, meaning no carb or electrolyte powder or fizzies of any kind made its way into the bladder. At resupply stops, he'd gulp down plenty of Coke, whole milk, chocolate milk, and his newly discovered secret weapon, half and half. Once in a while, he'd take an extra bottle or 2 of Coca-Cola for the road, and for the stretch between Pie Town and Silver City, which includes the hot and dry Gila Wilderness section, he strapped an extra 1.5 liter bottle of water on top of his tail fin rear rack bag. He did not pack a water filter or any purification tablets or any other type of water treatment. He made do with filling up at gas stations and restaurants and his motel rooms and cabins and various spigots, etc. He only drank from on-the-trail water sources twice on the whole route. Once from a well in the Great Basin and once from a stream between Abiquiu and Cuba, New Mexico. And I repeat, he did so without filtering or purification of any kind. And by the way, he did the whole Arizona Trail 800 race without purifying any water either, which is even more mind-blowing to me. Here's a crazy stat for you. Based on the kilojoule data captured from his power meter, Justinas burned 117,357 calories while he was pedaling during his 13 days on the divide. This averages out to burning 8,970 calories per day while riding his bike. Note that this does not even include all the calories burned when he wasn't pedaling, like during hike-a-bike and pushing the bike through snow and mud, or zombie walking around grocery stores, or even just his standard basal metabolic rate. When you factor all that stuff in, we're talking about expending well over 11,000 calories per day. So the next big question becomes, how the heck did he keep his engine fueled and running strong day after day? It should come as no surprise that he ate at every feasible opportunity and he consistently shoveled in as much food as his body could tolerate. I already mentioned the liquid calories through milk and half and Coke, which were just as important as solid food, if not more so, since sipping calories is easier on your body, while eating non-stop becomes tedious work and takes more of a toll on your teeth and your jaws and your digestive system over the course of the race. After pretty much running out of food when he got stuck for 13 hours in the Great Basin in 2023, Justinas always kept an emergency stash of 2,000 to 3,000 calories throughout the 2024 race. He sat down and enjoyed restaurant dining whenever he got a chance, and his most memorable meal was in Hartselle, Colorado, where he spent time chatting with a dot watcher while eating a burrito and an ice cream on a hot sunny day. As for on-the-bike snacking, Justinas primarily relied on gas stations and convenience stores because they tend to be quicker and easier to navigate than large grocery stores. He devoured copious amounts of yogurt and pickles whenever he got a chance, and a couple of his favorite Quickie Mart go-tos were bear claws and other pastries that he refers to as Danish delights, which are easy to squeeze the air out of and shove in a pocket, and they're packed with calories. He also carried various chocolate bars, nuts, Skittles, M&Ms, and he often took sandwiches and burritos to go. Interestingly, Justinas doesn't care for gummy bears, which are a staple for many bikepackers. He doesn't like the way they make his teeth feel, which, by the way, reminds me of something else that blew my mind when he told me. I'm not sure his mom knows this, but Justinas has just as much reason to call himself dirty teeth as I do. Listen closely to this. He carried a toothbrush and toothpaste the whole way to Mexico, but he did not brush his teeth at all during the Tour Divide. Yes, you heard me right, not even once. Weather is always a factor on the Tour Divide, and Justinas feels that living in Norway and dealing with the harsh winters gave him an advantage when the weather turned bad. His overall race tactics were guided more by outrunning storms and looking up and judging weather than staying ahead of other riders. Although he was always aware that Uba was nipping at his heels, Justinas was mainly concerned with peanut butter mud slowing him down. This led him to pull a couple all-nighters and to dig super deep into the deprivation cave on multiple occasions. But it also allowed him to pedal through rideable snow, whereas other riders got to it later when it started to melt and they were slowed down by the mud. One of these big commitments paid off especially well early in the race when he powered through to Lima, Montana to stay ahead of a storm. He was able to gain some time on the other leaders when they were bogged down with peanut butter mud on the notorious Medicine Lodge Road section of the route while he snuck through. After all was said and done, Justinas felt he had a pretty clean run, but of course he still thinks there's plenty of space for some improvement next time. But as of right now, there is no next time for him. He's done with the Tour Divide unless someone breaks his record in the near future and motivates him to get back out there. We'll see about that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him out there sooner rather than later. Justinas had 5 crashes throughout the race, but other than some bruises, he and his bike ended up just fine, and after the race was finished, he didn't have any lingering or long-term physical issues. There were no mechanicals. All he had to do was swap out brake pads before heading down Union Pass. The bike and the gear were flawless, and so was his outlook. When asked about success on the Tour Divide, Mike Hall famously said, "You must crave miles," and I think it's pretty obvious that Justinas surely does. His constant smile and the way he's always laughing and cracking himself up with his own jokes, no matter what the circumstances are, shows that he absolutely loves riding his bike and he relishes every single moment he's out there, and I think that's the real secret sauce to his success, although a whole lot of God-given ability doesn't hurt either.
So how was it? Yeah, good, huh? I bet he made it look too good. Well, thanks for watching. Yeah, the build-up for 25 or 2025 Divide has started. So get out there, ride your bikes, give back, pay it forward, and see you out there.
Thanks so much for squeezing dirty teeth into your busy schedule. Please help us reach more people and ensure you receive new videos by giving this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell. Until next time, ride bikes, give back, pay it forward.